The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. As this hearing is being conducted virtually, we must address a few housekeeping matters. During today's virtual hearing, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. To avoid inadvertent background noise, I or staff I designate may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. If there is a technology issue during a member's speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. We will be following the 5-minute rule. With 1 minute remaining in your time, the clock will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and it will be time to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, followed by members present at the time the hearing is called to order, in order of seniority, and we will alternate by party. Next, we will go to members who are not present when the hearing was called to order until every member has had a first round. Members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings or markups using the email address provided in advance to your staff. Let us begin. Today, I welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on ICE's FY 2023 budget request. We welcome Tay Johnson, Acting Director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Acting Director Johnson, as a career civil servant, you have been asked to step into this interim role as ICE Director, and we appreciate your service in this capacity. There are significant disagreements about immigration policy in this country and among members of the subcommittee. My own view is that we should work together to focus our limited resources on those who threaten our public safety and national security, and to find appropriate solutions that balance immigration enforcement with due process and that balance removals with humanitarian considerations. I believe the administration's actions are moving in that direction. For example, we have seen many important retractions in the last 16 months of the prior administration's policies that abrogated the rights of asylum seekers and other migrants. Those policies drove a wedge between ICE and many communities, particularly those with large migrant populations. I have also been heartened to see that ICE has taken additional steps to better focus its resources. For example, when you were before us last year, we discussed the draft environment priorities guidance you issued in February of 2021. This draft guidance focused ICE's resources on the pursuit and removal of aggravated felons and other serious criminals, compared to ICE's less targeted approach in the past. In late September, the Secretary updated that guidance to ensure ICE focuses its resources on the apprehension and removal of non-citizens who are a threat to our national security and public safety and on our border security. I was also pleased to see ICE's announcement this spring that it was directing its attorneys who represent ICE and immigration court proceedings to exercise discretion in accordance with these priorities. But more remains to be done. I continue to be concerned about the state of ICE detention facilities and how individuals are treated while in ICE custody. One issue I'm particularly alarmed by is that those in ICE custody continue to have difficulty obtaining access to legal counsel and communicating with their counsel when they do have it. For example, a 10-15-minute monitored phone call is not nearly sufficient given the sensitivity and complexity of the legal issues and necessary evidence one needs to present their case. I look forward to discussing these continuing issues. Lastly, I would like to recognize the important work and accomplishments of the Homeland Security Investigations workforce, including their work in disrupting transnational criminal organizations, and I look forward to hearing more about that work this afternoon. I will now turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing, and welcome, Acting Director Johnson. I thank you, sir, for your testimony today as we discuss the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Fiscal 2023 budget requests. Before I begin, I'd like to offer my sincere thanks for your 3 decades of service, which go all the way back to the Legacy Immigration and Naturalization Service. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is responsible for the enforcement of our nation's immigration, custom, and trade laws. Despite its rather straightforward mission, the men and women at ICE are often vilified just for enforcing the immigration laws because some of our colleagues are unable to get a majority of Congress to change the law. For the past few years, this administration's budget request has decreased ICE's budget for enforcement and removal operations, or what we refer to as ERO. This year's request decreases ERO by almost 9%, largely by reducing funding for detention beds for both adults and families. Time and time again, those cuts are restored in conference because a bipartisan and bicameral coalition of members understands that the enforcement of immigration law is not an optional exercise. Criminals, public safety threats, and yes, even some on the terrorist watch list are removed by ICE every year. It is irresponsible to advocate for defunding or even decreasing funding for enforcement actions that protect our community and our nation. We need a strong, effective, transparent, and accountable ICE, and we need to provide the necessary tools for ICE agents to do their jobs. Unfortunately, President Biden and DHS leaders have decided to tie the hands of ICE enforcement and removal operation officers by releasing prosecutorial discretion memos to limit removals and enforcement actions to a narrow and arbitrary subset of individuals eligible for deportation. On one hand, the administration tells us with a straight face that they need to exercise prosecutorial discretion because they have limited resources, while on the other hand, they submit a request that decreases enforcement resources. You can't have it both ways. Those actions are contradictory and amount to little more than a smokescreen for the real purpose of the memos, purposely reducing the enforcement of our nation's immigration laws. I've consistently advocated for a funding level that enables ICE to fulfill its law enforcement mission, including funding detention facilities. While we have sharp differences on this committee about immigration enforcement, there is broad bipartisan agreement to robustly fund Homeland Security investigations, or HSI. Special agents of the HSI do amazing work tackling some of the most heartbreaking cases, including child exploitation investigations, both here and abroad. They also investigate other bad actors in illicit transnational criminal networks, target migrants who are public safety or national security concerns, and disrupt predatory and illegal trade practices. Acting Director Johnson, please convey our thanks and appreciation for the work that the men and women at ICE are doing to protect this nation, sir. I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back.
Acting Director Johnson, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the record. Please proceed with your oral testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Roybal Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee for Homeland Security. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. My name is Tay Johnson. I am the Acting Director for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE's mission is to promote Homeland Security and public safety through the broad enforcement of over 400 federal laws governing our border, customs, trade, and immigration. Before I go any further, I would like to thank you for funding recently enacted the FY22 Omnibus to support our people and our mission. The FY22 funding supported our officers and special agents by increasing ICE's Victim Assistance Program, bolstering the Center for Countering Human Trafficking, combating child exploitation, and furthering ICE's information technology data monetization, among others. ICE employed policies and operational changes to support a fair, orderly, and humane immigration system, and has operated its detention system in a tremendously challenging environment due to the global pandemic. ICE acts in accordance with DHS-wide enforcement priorities to focus department resources on national security, public safety, and border security. The FY23 budget represents a fundamental shift by the administration towards an approach that emphasizes increased enrollment in alternatives to detention, or ATD, where appropriate, as a more humane, less costly, and effective means of monitoring individuals while they navigate the immigration removal process. We are requesting $75 million in increased funding to expand ATD participation and to ensure sufficient resources to monitor compliance with immigration proceedings. The FY23 budget also includes a request for an additional $15 million to provide technology investments for credible fear screenings and enhanced visitation opportunities for detainees, as well as supplementing access to counsel. Additionally, we seek $6.4 million and 50 additional ICE Health Service Corps positions to ensure ICE can continue delivering appropriate medical care. Cybercrime continues to be a growing threat, and the FY23 budget seeks to further enhance Homeland Security investigations' cybercrimes capabilities. ICE has continuously demonstrated results in this area. From FY17 through FY21, the number of cyber investigations have increased over 97%, excuse me. In FY21, HSI arrested over 3,700 individuals for crimes involving sexual exploitation of children, a 23% increase over FY20. And in FY21, over 1,100 victims of child exploitation were identified and rescued, which represents a 16% increase over FY20. The FY23 budget requests to establish a dedicated budget and further strengthen the HSI-led Center for Countering Human Trafficking, or CCHT. Currently, 16 DHS component offices are currently providing personnel to support the center's efforts to counter human trafficking and the importation of goods produced with forced labor. Additionally, the budget requests support for HSI's Victim Assistance Program, or VAP, building on enhancements received in FY22. ICE requests funding for positions for training, equipment, travel, and equipment to adequately expand the VAP program. These resources are paramount to continue providing the needed assistance to victims of child exploitation and human trafficking. Despite significant accomplishments in FY21, the Office of Principal Legal Advisor, known as OPLA, litigation teams have a growing number of non-detained docket of over 3.0 million cases requiring additional resources to address. The FY23 budget seeks $58.4 million and 341 additional OPLA positions, including 268 attorneys. Finally, ICE's mission support workforce serves as a critical role in ICE's ability to meet our national security, public safety, and border security missions. Despite the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic and the significant workload demands in supporting a 24/7 law enforcement agency, ICE's mission support workforce continues to operate efficiently to meet the needs of the agency. The FY23 budget seeks new positions and funding to address capability gaps in the areas of human resources, cybersecurity, policy refresh and development, training for tactical operations, leadership and career development, financial management, as well as other support programs. Thank you for inviting me to testify before you today, and thank you for your continued support for our dedicated personnel and our agency's mission. I am honored and humbled to represent the more than 20,000 hardworking ICE employees, and I'm proud to serve beside them and grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you. Acting Director Johnson, I believe we may have enough time for myself and Ranking Member Fleischman to ask our questions, and then we'll go into recess because of the two votes we have on the floor. Acting Director Johnson, we continue to hear about unacceptable conditions at detention facilities and the lack of basic services, including the lack of meaningful access to counsel, language access, and medical neglect. Let me begin with the lack of access to legal counsel. Advocates and legal representative groups have revealed how difficult it is for individuals in custody to access legal counsel. And once they do have that counsel, to have enough time and regular and private phone communications with that counsel. We've also learned that access to private settings or private phone calls is often limited or unavailable. Why is providing this necessary and important access to counsel so difficult for detention facilities, specifically the ability to talk in private and with enough time to discuss their cases?
Thanks, Congresswoman. A very good question. It's an area that we have been working towards for many years. As you're aware, access to counsel is one of our primary sort of responsibilities and something we take absolutely seriously. We have been working with the various facilities to increase access to counsel. As you may be aware, we are providing our detained population with a number of monthly free minutes so that they can not only speak to their counsel, but to speak to their family members. We're also working on adding a virtual visitation option at all of our facilities so that, when there's issues with access to phones, they can use other technology such as Skype or other sort of technologies to stay in contact with their counsel. Additionally, we're working with the Department of Justice to expand our legal orientation program so that individuals could have access to free legal services. And we are working with our various vendors to look for other opportunities so that individuals may be able to speak with their counselors without some of the issues that you've identified.
Okay. What is the timeline for this? I mean, why is it so difficult if someone is talking, let's just say it's a phone conversation, why are they so limited in the amount of time that they can speak with their counsel?
Well, typically there's different phones for talking to your legal representative than there is for talking to your family or friends. The phones that have the 10 or 15 minute limit are typically the phones that are in the housing units and are really designed for keeping in contact with family and friends as opposed to speaking with lawyers. And it's necessary, just given the small number of phones, to put a limit on how long an individual can talk, just so that everyone in the housing unit has an opportunity to use the phones. So it's certainly something that we're aware of. This issue is not all that prevalent in most of our facilities, but there are a handful of facilities, largely local jails, where we still have some work to be done. And we're hoping the legal orientation programs and our work with DOJ, as well as some of these virtual visitation programs will help.
Okay. And what is the timeline? When do you anticipate that some of these problems will be addressed?
So we're working with the DOJ now on the legal orientation program. I believe we received some funding in FY22 for this effort, and we obviously requested additional funding in FY23 to expand it to more facilities. But the tablets and some of the other virtual platforms are well underway now at most of our facilities, and we're going to continue to roll it out throughout the rest of this fiscal year. So the work's underway.
Okay, Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be deferential to you, but would you prefer to recess before I ask questions with the vote, or do you want me to go ahead and ask? It's about 148 left.
I will leave that up to you. Do you want to?
I've got some proxies to do. I don't know if you have any, but I'd feel a little bit more comfortable if we could recess now and then reconvene right after the two votes. Mr. Director, we just have two votes on the floor. One is about ready to conclude, and then that's what we're facing. And I want to make sure that we give you every opportunity to address what's before the subcommittee. Madam Chair, would you be willing to adjourn?
No, absolutely, especially if you have proxies.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
we are in now, the subcommittee is now in recess.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Homeland Security will now come to order. Acting Director, thank you so much for your patience. I will now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished chair for the adjournment so we could go and vote. Acting Director Johnson, recently, sir, the administration has released several policy memos under the guise of prosecutorial discretion that reduces the ability of ERO officers to enforce the law except for 3 narrow categories, citing limited resources. My first question, sir, Acting Director Johnson, if the premise of these memos is to focus limited resources on the most pressing categories of offenders, why not ask for more resources, sir?
Oh, good question, Congressman Fleischman. I guess I would start with, look, detaining individuals in this COVID environment has been extremely challenging, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. It is certainly just given the lack of medical personnel and the ability to hire the guard services and even some of the ancillary services, bringing on additional detention capacity. While it's something that the agency has looked at, it just does not seem to be a viable situation given the current COVID-19 environment. So given the lack of detention resources, the inability to detain a lot of individuals just because of the mounds of litigation surrounding COVID-19 and the fact that many people with risk factors can't be taken into ICE custody to begin with, we are going to have to focus our resources only on those individuals that we can actually remove and those individuals that are public safety threats and national security threats. So I think that's in line with the current priorities.
Well, Mr. Director, in fact, the administration proposes a cut to enforcement and removal operations of around 9%, sir. How many fewer individuals will that allow ICE to detain when considering current COVID restrictions?
So as you mentioned, and I'm assuming this is accurate, but the cut is largely related to detention beds. And as I stated, I think it's just the acknowledgement of how truly difficult it is to detain individuals in this COVID-19 environment. So we're focusing on alternatives to detention, a much more humane and effective and significantly less costly option for monitoring individuals who don't pose a public safety or national security threat.
Yes, sir. One final question in this round. In addition to limiting the categories of aliens who ERO can take action against, the administration also released a memo seeking the administrative closure of cases currently on the docket that do not meet the administration's narrow enforcement priorities. How will that impact the enforcement of our nation's immigration laws?
So, consistent with the immigration enforcement priorities, we think that it makes the most sense to use not only our OPLA attorneys' resources, but also the Executive Office for Immigration Review, the courts' resources in a much more targeted way. So, we're hopeful that once we remove some of these sort of non-priority cases, it will allow us to get through these individuals that are, public safety threats and national security threats that are on the docket much more quickly, and hopefully those cases that would typically take 5 years or longer to adjudicate can be adjudicated much more quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Madam Chair, I will yield back and wait for round 2. Thank you.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Mr. Director. Glad to have you with us and appreciate your testimony. I want to address the cooperation between ICE and local law enforcement, and particularly the status and future of the 287G program, as it's called. I remember when I first became chair of this subcommittee some years ago, we had a hearing with ICE, with one of your predecessors, and we were talking about what seemed to me and others to be rather indiscriminate place raids all over the place. But at the same time, we realized that there were hundreds, thousands of people who should be deported, who were coming out of our prison system every day, and we didn't even know who they were. Well, that was some years ago, and what ensued were a series of efforts to deal with this. Remember Secure Communities, the priority enforcement program, back and forth with various efforts to focus this program appropriately. And in the process, 287G, the program that where local law enforcement makes an agreement with ICE for enforcement activities, that came under a lot of scrutiny. And the Trump administration, I think it's fair to say, weaponized that program, expanded it greatly, went from 34 participating jurisdictions to 152. That included 16 in my home state. And so I'm glad to see that President Biden has rolled that back. He has expressed his commitment to, quote, force local against DHS programs that, quote, force local law enforcement to take on the role of immigration enforcement. But I want to ask you to elaborate on that. We all know that that our local law enforcement can't simply be the long arm of ICE. That compromises their local trust and access and so many other things essential to local law enforcement. So the question is, what is the appropriate kind of cooperation? And what about the 287G program, first of all? I know you're reviewing that program. What's the result of that review thus far? And do you anticipate that some of the agreements made in the last administration will not be continued? What's the future of that program? You've announced the end of workplace raids. The secretary has announced that, and the desire to take a more targeted approach, presumably targeting more dangerous people who pose a danger to the community, perhaps coming out of the penal system as opposed to the front end of the law enforcement process. But I'm asking you generally, what's the appropriate role? What is your vision of how local law enforcement cooperates with ICE and the areas where ICE chooses to use other methods and does not rely on local law enforcement?
Very good question, Mr. Price. It's certainly an area that we've given a lot of thought to over the last several months. As you indicate, the program, 287G program, is currently under review. There are currently about 70 287G programs and about another 70 warrant servicer officer programs. Well, these are just, two different programs. One where folks are actually empowered to enforce immigration laws, which are the 287G program with some training, and the warrant service officer is just folks have the ability to serve certain warrants of arrest and warrants of deportations. So, the 287G program is just one example of the sort of cooperation with state and locals. We believe that cooperation with the local authorities is key, but we also believe that there just has to be appropriate checks and balances to make sure that folks are coloring within the lines and are acting sort of responsibly with that authority. So in the 22 sort of congressional language, there was a requirement that OPR and CRCL go out and take a close look at some of our 287G partners and raise any concerns as it might relate to civil rights and civil liberties. And so we're aware of that requirement. It's something that's underway. And, just as a general matter, we believe the cooperation of the state and local governments and the enforcement of whether it's immigration laws or some of our criminal cases is absolutely key. I mean, they serve as a force multiplier, and we cannot perform our mission without the partnerships with our local government agencies.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ranking Member, thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your remarks, and thank you for being here today. First off, I would like to thank the men and women in your agency who do their best to maintain law and order when this administration has not made that an easy task. You all have an incredibly difficult and complex duty to this country, and I hope you are aware of the support that you have. This invasion of foreign nationals at our southern border should be the top priority of this administration and Congress. As the acting director for ICE, I look forward to hearing how we can help you clean up this disaster. The historic crisis at our southern border is set to worsen greatly due to the announced rescission of Title 42, which will bring a tidal wave of illegal immigrants across our southern border and overwhelm an already overworked and understaffed agents of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The well-resourced cartels, gang members, human traffickers, and drug smugglers will exploit this crisis to further endanger American citizens. Last year, you testified that the U.S. was seeing a record low number of deportations. You stated that a contributing factor was being able to expel individuals that have not made it into the detention network and in a position to be removed via Title 42. With the recent announcement of Title 42's rescission, could you tell me how this is going to affect ICE's ability to remove individuals? And do you believe the number of deportations will begin to increase once this goes into effect?
So really good questions. I do think that the number of ICE deportations will increase once Title 42 goes away, because we are expending a good number of ICE resources currently on the expulsion of individuals via this Title 42 authority. Since Title 42 has been in effect, we have removed about 85,000 individuals with ICE air resources to countries under the T42 authority. So if and when T42 goes away, that'll free up some of those airframes and resources for us to increase our typical standard Title 8 removals / deportations.
Several weeks ago, Secretary Mayorkas sat in front of this committee and explained that he is preparing the agencies he is responsible for to be ready for this massive influx of immigrants. Hope is not a strategy, and I believe we need to have a clear plan in place to deal with the influx that is to come. Could you please explain to me and this committee, what will ICE be ready to do differently as of May 24th?
Very good question. It's something we've been planning for the better part of a year for the end of Title 42. We'll continue to deploy resources down to the southern border as we have for at least the last 12 or 16 months to assist with the orderly and humane processing of individuals, namely enrolling them on ATD, scheduling an appointment for them to show up in the interior to receive their charging documents, et cetera. We are continuing to beef up our transportation networks, whether it's ground transportation or airframes, and preparation for the end of Title 42. That work has been underway for quite a while, and it's going to be really important that we have the ground transportation and airframes to move folks to where the beds are or where the support structures are.
As the head of ICE, what amount of advice and conversation have you given to the Secretary Mayorkas and the White House concerning the tidal wave of immigrants that are coming our way? I mean, again, you said you've been preparing for this for over a year, and I'm assuming that is by building hospitality centers and medical centers and receiving centers, when you think we would have been sending up singles to where we wouldn't have this tidal wave of immigrants, but to kind of more, encourage people to stay at home, and but instead of taking this dangerous journey to the border. I'm always concerned. It's like, is the president even listening to his secretary, and is the secretary listening to the people under his command, such as yourself, Director?
So I can only speak to my conversations with the department and the secretary, and absolutely they are taking our input and all the input from the career professionals within the organization. You know, again, we're pushing the resources and trying to push the border south. We've, you know, devoting a lot of resources in Mexico as well as the Northern Triangle, and really trying to stem the flow and target some of these transnational criminal organizations well before they make it to our southern border. So that work is underway. It'll continue. We continue to have discussions with Mexico and Guatemala about, you know, them doing their part to stop the flow. But, you know, there are certainly a lot of efforts underway to sort of reduce the flow of migrants to our southern border.
Thank you, Director. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, thanks so much for being with us today. I first want to talk about some big picture reputational challenges facing ICE. In December, the Washington Post reported that an internal working group of Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, agents developed a proposal to separate from ICE because of the degree to which ICE's negative reputation impedes their work. The agents cited 77 examples of how the HSI's affiliation with ICE erodes their partnerships and impedes investigations and their ability to fulfill HSI's mission, and reported that the toll on HSI agents from this affiliation is getting worse. The agents also described feeling like HSI's affiliation with ICE's immigration enforcement role endangers their personal safety. If DHS's main investigative agency can't do its job because ICE's reputation is getting in the way, that's clearly a problem for DHS's overall mission. Mr. Johnson, how are you working to address the behaviors and actions that lead to these reputational challenges within ICE so that the agency can do its job?
Very, very good question, and we appreciate that. I mean, it starts with educating the public and the community on the great work that HSI does each and every day. We recognize how polarizing the immigration enforcement portfolio is. It's nothing new. It's been like that for, you know, the better part of, you know, several decades, and it's likely never going to change. So this isn't a new phenomenon, but it does create challenges for our special agents that are out here in the communities trying to partner with state and local governments. And, you know, and they have to come up with workarounds in certain areas. So, you know, we certainly understand the issue. You know, we're continuing to try to sort of do some capacity building with the state and local governments, because while there are certainly some folks that will never agree with any immigration enforcement whatsoever, there are lots of communities that can stand behind rescuing kids from child exploitation and rescuing trafficking victims, and just getting that message out that we are a resource and a tool that can be available to assist them with some of those investigations will go a long way. So that's.
Well, Mr. Johnson, as the director of an agency, to have that kind of reputation where your own staff is feeling like the agency is a drag on their ability to execute their critical national security mission is a problem. And I think that, you know, while that reputation may be longstanding, as even the acting director, you have the ability to change the culture in an organization. I think that in our congressional oversight capacity, it's just unacceptable to say, oh, this is just how it is. And so we ask of you, sir, to consider the ongoing challenges for hiring staff, retaining those staff, and making sure that we are earning the trust of the community, recognizing how imperative that is to ICE's ability to do its work. I understand how challenging the work is right now, and I hope that as you do this work and you lead this agency, even on an acting basis, that ICE is focused on addressing the root causes of this level of discontent within the workforce. DHS agencies must do more to address the behavior throughout the agency that tarnishes the whole department's reputation and therefore undermines its mission. I've encouraged the secretary to focus on this too. So I want you to know that this is not just being directed to you. This is a problem within the whole department. Border Patrol agents' treatment of Black migrants in Del Rio last September is just one publicized example of what I'm talking about. I think that I'll stop there and yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
So if I could respond, I mean, I do think a key piece to just getting everyone educated is it's not just on the HSI portfolio, but it's also on the changes that we made in terms of our enforcement priorities for immigration. And while everyone won't be a supporter of the new changes in our enforcement priorities, I do think that there are a number of jurisdictions out there who can actually support this more focused approach where we're targeting the worst of the worst and not so much people that are just in the country illegally who have extensive ties in the United States. So we're pretty confident that with all the work that's underway, it'll take some time to change some minds of folks, but eventually we're going to get to a much better place. But we appreciate your concerns.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, Director Johnson. I thank you for being here. I have to tell you, a few weeks ago, I had this conversation with Secretary Mayorkas about the low ICE deportation numbers and how that concerns me. And it actually makes me believe, quite frankly, that what's going on at the southern border, it's not a failed immigration policy. It's not lack of resources. This is your policy. This is what you want. These number of people coming across the border illegally and not being deported. And evidence of that is when I look at ICE deportations last year, down to 59,000 from 359,000 in FY19. So that 359,000 down to 59,000. Now, Secretary Mayorkas tried to convince me that he was really putting out the more serious offenders, because he said that 46% of the folks that y'all were deporting were felons. In the previous administration, only 18%. But I push back on that because if you know the overall number, that's where it matters. Look at the numbers. 46% of 59,000 is 27,000 people. 18% of 185,000 was 33,000 people. So even that year, we deported more felons than this administration did last year. And what makes no sense to me is when I look at your detention beds, it can't be an asset problem, because when I look at your detention beds, you have 34,000 beds funded last year. 19,000 were actually in use. 19,000 of the 34,000 that we funded. Now, in this year, you actually asked for 9% less in the budget request for that. So that concerns me. But what really concerns me most of all, and the reason I think this is by design and not, nothing to do with a failed immigration policy, is when I look at and listen to you all talk about prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutorial discretion does not mean you get to pick and choose what laws you will enforce. You get to pick and choose what order you will enforce them. That's your prosecutorial discretion. And Mr. Director Mayorkas Secretary Mayorkas brought that same issue up. So when I look at detention beds in this year's budget, you're asking to cut 5,000 more beds for adults, another 2,500 beds eliminated for family detention. So I can't understand this. It's not a benefit or not an asset problem. Now, alternate to detention, that's what y'all are using instead of putting people in detention facilities. I'm okay with that if needed. But here's the thing. You have 200,000 immigrants who are out on ATDs, and you say that 85% check in on time. Now, that 85% checks in on time the first time because they get benefits. They get their benefits and then they never show back up. But even that 15% that's non-compliant the first time, that's about 30,000 absconders that are going into our community. And yet you're only using 19 of the 34,000 detention beds that we've made available. That makes no sense to me. And when I see this influx that's coming down the line, when you raise Title 42, the 6 pillars that Secretary Mayorkas talked about, those six pillars have absolutely nothing to do with stopping illegal immigration. You know what they do? They speed up processing. We're not going to stop anybody from illegally coming into this country. We're simply going to try to process them more quickly so we don't wind up with 10,000 people housed under a bridge on the border. So I guess my first question would be,
Mr. Rutherford, I'm sorry, you're way over
why?
time. I'll let you ask
Okay.
the one question. I'll do you that courtesy and give him an opportunity to respond.
Well, I'd just like to hear his response. Why? Why aren't we stopping and deporting people out of this country?
Okay, I think the best way to just taking some of your earlier points, the 59,000 that you mentioned that ICE removed in FY21, as I mentioned earlier, you also have to take into account the 84 or 85,000 expulsions that ICE also sort of removed by air, and that'll take that number up significantly. I also note that you compared FY19 removal numbers, which was prior to COVID. It was during a time where we did not have the limitations on who we could put in an ICE detention bed or how the use rate that we could actually get out of facilities. So I'm not sure it's a real apples to apples comparison when you're just looking at removal numbers, because it's this COVID-19 environment has significantly changed how we could detain individuals, which individuals we can actually detain, and certainly had a significant impact on the number of removals.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I share my colleagues' commitment to wanting to speed up the processing of individuals. I think that that's one way that we can deliver justice, is to ensure that individuals receive their day in court, for advocating for lawful asylum. One of the ways that we can do that, I would encourage my colleague to work with us on, is to ensure access to legal counsel, to make sure that we process individuals and that they have rights associated with seeking lawful asylum. Acting Director, I also wanted to bring up the topic that I focused with you on last year, and that was the discussion about detention of U.S. citizens. ICE has communicated with our office and the committee that they do not detain U.S. citizens. ICE has stated that they cannot track data or instances of detention of U.S. citizens. Fiscal year 22, Omnibus withheld $5 million from ICE in part due to the agency's failure to provide a report to this committee. This is the same report you committed to sharing with the committee during your last hearing before Congress. I raise this issue because we have heard reports of yet another U.S. citizen who was held in detention in Pennsylvania just this year. So my question is, why has ICE continued to fail to track or report this information that the committee has requested for multiple fiscal years?
Very, very good questions, Congressman. I will note that the information or the reporting of U.S. citizen data is now on our public website as of about a month or so ago. We have been trying to get that official congressional report out the building. Was hoping to have it done before this hearing, but was not successful. But I assure you that will be out the door in short order. So you should have that official congressional report hopefully by the end of this week if we're lucky. The number compared to prior fiscal years, the number of U.S. citizens that were actually arrested are significantly less than what they have been. I think over the last 2 years, the number of arrests were somewhere around 5 or 7 individuals, and the number of individuals that were actually detained was like 1 individual over the last 2 fiscal years, and none of those individuals were actually removed from the country. So, I mean, I think that what that illustrates is that the process and the safeguards that we actually have in place to quickly review claims of U.S. citizenship is actually working. Again, I can't, stress enough how terribly complicated it is to determine whether an individual has actually derived citizenship or they've adjusted their status and the like. But we do have the appropriate policies and safeguards in place to make sure that we're not sending people out of the country who are in fact U.S. citizens.
I note that you talked about the difference between arrest and detain. Do you also in the report discuss the length at which individuals are detained?
I don't know offhand. For some reason, I don't think so, but let me take that as a get back and we can circle back with your office.
Have there been any changes in ICE's intake procedures to prevent this from happening? What steps does ICE take today? What steps can you take today to reduce that number of detained U.S. citizens down?
Well, again, it's, I don't know. I mean, in my perfect world, we'll never arrest a U.S. citizen, but just given the complexity of the situation and the fact that oftentimes people claim to be U.S. citizens when they're not, just in an effort to avoid immigration proceedings. I think what you see now where, relatively a small number of people were actually arrested and basically 0 or 1 being removed is probably as good as it's gonna get, given just how often, that we're dealing with people who actually make false claims to being a U.S. citizen just to avoid certain consequences. So, I mean, I'm not saying that we're not going to strive to try to do this even better, but just given the dynamic, of U.S. citizenship and how complicated it is to determine whether someone has derived citizenship, I don't think we're ever going to get to a 0, quite frankly.
Okay.
Yield back, Madam Chair.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Johnson. Good to see you again. And I again want to say thanks for appearing before the committee. Thanks for your many years of service at ICE. And you obviously have a very critical mission within DHS to keep Americans safe and Iowans safe too. Also wanted to just let you know too, I particularly support the work that HSI does, Homeland Security Investigations, to crack down on child exploitation, human trafficking. Top priority of mine back home in the district to fight for our kids, the most vulnerable among us, and really want to applaud the work that your agents are doing to help carry out that mission. Just met with a group of folks in Postville, Iowa, small town Iowa in my district, about how we can work to prevent those kinds of challenges in our community. And obviously you are a frontline in that fight. So thank you for that work there. Also wanted to flag something that I'm very concerned about for my district and my constituents. And in March, ICE released its fiscal year 2021 report 3 months late. That was after Republican members of this subcommittee joined me in introducing a resolution of inquiry requiring you to release this critical information to the American people. And it did reveal some major concerns when we were able to get that information regarding levels of enforcement, notably a 68% decrease in deportations over the past year, the lowest level of deportations in 26 years. So my question to you, Director, is how do you justify this historic decrease in deportations?
Very, very good question, Congresswoman. I think it's a combination of the COVID-19 pandemic, first and foremost. I think it's, you know, all the litigation that has impacted who we can actually detain and requiring individuals with certain risk factors be immediately released from custody. I also think you have to take into account the 85,000 expulsions that that our officers had carried out, you know, consistent with the Title 42 sort of authorization. So you have to factor that in as well. I think if you look back at the last 6 months of FY20 and actually compare it to the month-over-month removals for FY21, you would notice that the numbers aren't all that different, and it's just sort of indicative of, you know, the pandemic and how difficult it was to, one, even house people in custody for any extended period of time, but to effectuate removals when you're only able to use such a small percentage of your beds and detain so few folks.
Well, I would ask that you please follow up with us on those specific numbers, because when I'm seeing a 68% decrease, that is alarming. And I know we've had a number of conversations about the memo that was released shortly before we had the conversation to speak last year about the changes in your enforcement priorities. And to me, there's a direct priority between that memo that went out last February and the 68% decrease in deportations. You look at the year prior with COVID, we were experiencing COVID in 2020 as well. And we didn't see that historic decrease. In the memo specifically, you talk about limited resources, but I find it a little bit disingenuous because you're claiming this while the budget is actually requesting a cut to the agency's enforcement operations. So how do you reconcile the ask for a cut for enforcement while we're having this historic low in deportations?
No, I think the request to cut the bed number is just reflective of the administration's position that alternatives to detention is the more appropriate and humane way of dealing with segments of the population that don't pose a, you know, public safety or national security threat.
So, but that alternative is to release them into the country, correct?
With monitoring. I mean, the idea is that we will use some of that funding that we would be spending on detention to hire individuals to more closely monitor folks on a non-detained setting or on ATD, whether it's GPS monitor or Smart Link. I mean, the reality is we can't detain. There's not enough beds out in the private sector to detain our way out of this situation.
But the point being that once Title 42 goes away, we're going to have an increased number of these people coming across, and instead of detaining them with those extra beds that you have, you're cutting that and going to be releasing those people into our country. And I think that's what Americans are concerned about right now. We are seeing this surge happen at our southern border. We want to see that stopped, not increased, which unfortunately, I think when you're asking for a decrease, that's my main concern here. So I see I'm out of time. So Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Rubensberger.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Johnson, thank you for being here today. And I have to say right off the bat that you have an incredibly tough job, and I don't envy the position you're in. Now, while I have some serious concerns regarding certain standards and ERO tactics, I've always been impressed with your agency's work dismantling transnational gangs, especially the crime syndicates that are importing fentanyl from Mexico and into the country. Now, Homeland Security Investigation specifically is doing amazing things. You don't have to look any further than Baltimore Field Office, which is in part of my district, who were gracious enough to recently host my office team, for a tour. Now, last year, Homeland Security Baltimore alone seized 2.6 million in currency, 630 firearms, 2,000 pounds of cocaine, and over 17 pounds of fentanyl. To put that into perspective, that is enough fentanyl to kill roughly 3.7 million. Now, from what I hear, Baltimore's OCDEF has been a great success. It's kind of like a team coming together to focus on these issues. I've always said that it's essential that federal, state, and local government work together, and the strike force concept brings synergy in action. However, with drug overdose hitting a record high in 2021, there's much more we can do in Baltimore and throughout the country. And my questions to you, Mr. Director, are: number one, do you believe the OCDF strike force model can be replicated with success in other localities? What are some of the Homeland Security's investigation operational challenges when investigating drug trafficking cases? And three, also of interest to me, as I-95 runs through the heart of my district, what are some of the Homeland Security's operational challenges when investigating human trafficking cases? Did you get all that?
I do.
Okay, good.
Really, really good questions. And so I'll start with just the OSADEF. Just so you know, sir, there are 19 of those OSADEF task forces all throughout the country. HSI is an active participant and is fully engaged in each one of those 19 task forces. Just for context, there have been 335 total investigations initiated in FY22 so far this year, and HSI has sponsored 156 of those new investigations. So we are at the forefront of sort of the spear and those OSADEF task force, and we are extremely proud of the great work that our HSI special agents and folks are doing each and every day. So I think, you know, we'll continue to be supportive of any expansion of OSADEF and any efforts to sort of combat these TCOs and others who wish to bring these dangerous narcotics over into U.S. soil.
You know, I do want to say that years ago, I was an investigative prosecutor and doing a lot of gang work and drug work. And I can tell you, I think that's the best way to focus on the gang problem, on the international gang problem, and the feds, the locals, and the state working together. And I think it really helps, and it helps us get the bad guys.
Could not agree more, Congressman. And just on the gang front, HSI is really leading the charge on that. Just last year alone, we arrested 3,574 known gang members, which has a direct impact on public safety and making our community safe. So we're extremely proud of that great work. You asked about what challenges we have, in investigating human trafficking. Human trafficking is a pretty labor-intensive sort of bucket. Right now, about 10% of our cases that we initiate are related to human trafficking. And because, you know, these cases tend to need to be investigated for, you know, at least a year, oftentimes much longer, we just need to make sure we have continue to sort of deploy the resources. So any assistance you can provide with additional resources, as well as criminal analysts to support these long-term and complex investigations, would be extremely critical. As you may know, we only have 750 criminal analysts assigned to HSI. That's about one analyst for every 10 special agents. And we really have to do a better job of getting that ratio down to about one analyst to every 5 agents. So, we'll continue to work. Our estimate is that we need about 900 criminal analysts in order to get to that, to a more acceptable ratio. And just so you know, our current, staffing only allows a criminal analyst to be assigned to about 14% of the cases. And that's a very small number, but whenever we assign a criminal analyst to a case, those 14% of the cases, they were resulted in 30% of the total arrests. So I think it just speaks volume of how important and critically necessary it is to have more criminal analysts to support some of these complex investigations.
And now that completes our first round, and we will now have a second round of questions. Acting Director Johnson, this subcommittee has provided funding to expand detention oversight capacity within ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility so that ICE can more quickly identify systemic issues and problems at specific facilities. What is the current status of staffing for this office, and is the office meeting its hiring targets?
So, very good question, Congresswoman. Just so you know, for numbers in FY19, that office was able to inspect 48 facilities. In FY20, we were able to increase that to 121. In FY21, it increased to 208. And so far in FY22, we've conducted 85 inspections. We're on target to do the 2 inspections a year as you guys put in the appropriations language. And last I checked, I think we were, and don't hold me to this, but we'll circle back. I think we had hired at least 85%, 80 to 85% of the folks that we were scheduled to bring on board, recognizing that there was a request in FY23 for some additional staffing to continue that effort.
Can you highlight some of the changes in ICE policies or requirements and oversight detention facilities that have resulted from these ODO inspections?
Well, the program is still sort of in its infancy. They're ramping up their inspection capability as I highlighted. I mean, they still have a little ways to go. They have a really good inspectional tool that they've developed that really focuses on the aspects of a detention operation that means the most to an individual that's detained. And between ODO as well as the numerous other oversight components that we have, whether it's the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the Office of Detention Ombudsman, there are numerous oversight entities that are responsible for ensuring that the conditions are appropriate for ICE's detained population.
And are you receiving regular updates from ODO and these agencies and the head of enforcement and removal operations?
We are. Every time there's a new inspection, we get the report typically within a couple of weeks. We typically have staff that participate in the out briefing so that we're immediately aware if there are any significant issues that need to be addressed immediately before the report is finalized. So there is a lot of coordination amongst the various inspectional components.
Well, let me ask you a question about one of the facilities. This spring, the DHS Inspector General issued a management alert after an inspection of the Torrance County Detention Facility in Estancia, New Mexico, calling for the immediate transfer of all detainees from that facility. Yet ICE disagreed with OIG's conclusions, but ICE also own contracting office modified the contract because the facility was unable to maintain sufficient staffing for the detainees housed at this facility. Can you explain ICE's position on the management alert and why ICE continues to use this facility, given the multiple issues at this location over the past several years?
So just prior to that management alert, ODO had actually gone out and done an inspection of that facility, and they actually were rated superior. So we had that. We also
I'm sorry. I need some clarification. You're saying that the OIG came to the conclusion that they should be immediately removed. Many times they will come and say certain things need to be corrected. But in this case, it was the immediate removal. And you're telling me that ODO came out with a rating of excellent at the same time?
Just before the visit, ODO had done a review, and that those inspectional findings were excellent or the equivalent of excellent, superb, whatever the nomenclature is. Also, we had a team of folks that were actually on site at the facility and were intimately aware of the conditions at the facility. Were there issues? Sure. Were they the same sort of issues that all of our facilities have been experiencing in this COVID environment, with difficulty hiring staff and getting certain medical folks? Absolutely. But based on the population level that we actually had at the facility, which was only like 20% of the total beds, it was our view, and we looked at this pretty extensively, that it was more than sufficient staff to accommodate the small number of individuals that were being detained in the facility at the time. There were a number of other issues that we took exception with that particular report that I would prefer not go into details here. But we did take a really hard look at the findings. And, there was just, we did not agree with the recommendations, and that's not totally uncommon. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. This is one that we felt strongly they got it wrong.
Okay, Acting Director, my time is way past. But I would like to follow up on this with you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Director Johnson. Sir, as the number of encounters along the border continues to increase, ICE has decided to rely on the alternatives to detention program. This program has seen a massive increase in enrollment. Is it your plan simply to continue to put all of these people on ATD, a program which ICE itself has said in the past has little value but is of significant expense? And if so, how will you ensure that it is used as an enforcement tool?
Very, very good question. I guess I would start by saying, while the ATD program might be fairly, to some extent costly, it's not nearly as expensive as it is for detention first. We think it's really important that if you're going to use alternatives to detention, then you actually do have to have the staff to monitor these cases and respond to alerts and the like, and just position the agency in a spot where they can actually provide the robust monitoring that is required. And we think that, if we recognizing that, there isn't an endless supply of funding, and you typically can't, just ask for the there's some limits on what you can ask for. The expectation is that we'll use some of the funding that we would be saving from fewer detention beds to buy some additional staff to increase the monitoring of those individuals.
Yes, sir. A follow-up question. ATD has a compliance rate now of 86%. Right now, there are over 230,000 people on ATD, and reports say that could grow to 600,000 people. Are you committed to rapidly removing the tens of thousands of individuals who undoubtedly abscond from ATD, which, if your compliance rate holds, could be nearly 100,000 individuals, sir?
So the compliance rates have actually increased in FY21. I think that the 16% or 14% that you were noting is an FY21 stat. The FY22 stat is actually a 91% compliance rate. So we've seen some improvement in that area. And yes, sir, we are absolutely committed to locating and removing any individual that has absconded from the program.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the answer to our questions. And Madam Chair, I'll yield back so others can ask.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In July, the Biden administration implemented a new policy that generally exempts pregnant, postpartum, and nursing women from immigration detention. This is a reversal of the previous administration's policies that led to a 52% increase in the number of detained people who are pregnant. Mr. Johnson, what trends do you expect we'll see this year in terms of the detention of pregnant and breastfeeding people?
Very good question. I think we've, as long as you're going to have new cases coming across the southwest border, there's probably going to be individuals that either one, don't even know they're pregnant when they hit ICE custody and learn about it just after their medical screening, or two, they're a recent border crosser who comes across that's pregnant and can't be immediately released at the moment because there's just no safe release plan, and they would have to go to an ICE detention bed for a short period of time. I expect that, in the rare event that someone is in ICE custody and is determined to be pregnant, that they will generally be released from custody fairly quickly. And, and only in very rare occasions would anyone stay in custody for an extended period of time.
And for those who are pregnant and in ICE's care, what procedures does ICE have in place to ensure that each is receiving clinically recommended maternal health care services and social supports?
Our Immigration Health Services Corps does a phenomenal job at providing medical care. They have a program to deal with individuals who are pregnant or postpartum. It's in their sort of, their medical orders, and there is a process in place to sort of deal with that segment of the population should there be a need to deal with it. But again, the guidance is pretty clear. We have instructed our folks that we are not to detain individuals absent extraordinary circumstances.
Okay, I'm going to ask for the record that your team share with us the procedures for the clinically recommended maternal health care for individuals who are pregnant. What is ICE doing to ensure pregnant women in custody are offered the COVID-19 vaccine and booster shot? And what other practices are in place to safeguard pregnant people in ICE facilities from COVID?
So I can run down. I have no idea whether the vaccine is even acceptable for those that are pregnant.
It is.
I don't want to speak out of turn. So
it 100% is unequivocally. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so we'll let us run that down, and we'll get that back to you.
Okay. Last, I want to talk about family separation. The Trump administration's family separation policy was a moral stain on our country's immigration history. An OIG report from May 2021 stated that under the last administration, ICE removed at least 348 parents without the necessary documents for reunification, and in some cases removed parents without their children, even after parents told ICE officers they wanted their children to accompany them upon removal. As you know, the lack of proper documentation is a catastrophic roadblock to reunifying families. And one of OIG's recommendations to ICE was for ICE staff to document and obtain acknowledgement for each parent's preference on whether their child should remain in the US or be removed with the parent. That was the OIG's recommendation. OIG shared with my office that as of last Tuesday, May 10th, ICE had not demonstrated any new policy or guidance for obtaining supervisory acknowledgement for each parent's preference per OIG's recommendation. Mr. Johnson, when will ICE implement a new procedure to obtain and record parents' preference for their children to remain in the US or be removed with them?
So as you are aware, Congresswoman, I mean, there's very little family separation that's occurring right now. In fact, there's a family reunification task force that has been working diligently to reunite a lot of the folks that had been separated under the prior administration. I don't know that my policy shop is currently working on a reunification policy because it is totally contrary to the current administration and the agency's position to do any family separation. So
okay, well, we will be following up with you all. I don't see how in the face of this action having been taken and then exploited and really just so in a horrifying way for us to not heed the recommendation of an inspector general's direct report describing the need for a policy, even if the separation is not occurring, right? We know that without proper procedures, we can slip into bad practices. And so it's my hope that when you receive that communication from our office, you all do take action. Thanks so much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned last year, since the beginning of the Biden administration, our southern border has seen an invasion of migrants trying to come into our country illegally. Border Patrol remains overwhelmed by the vast number of migrants they are detaining. We have heard their facilities quickly filled up, further making a problem for agents to process illegal immigrants. When we spoke at this hearing last year, you stated that a priority of the agency was to increase the number of HSI agents abroad to help push the southern border further south to stop individuals before they get to U.S. ports of entry. Now, as Secretary Mayorkas has stated, and something I actually agree with, the southern border cannot be the first line of defense. What resources does ICE need to actually prevent people from coming to the U.S.? And tell us more about pushing the southern border further south.
Very good question. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need the ability to devote more resources to human trafficking and human smuggling. Right now, as I mentioned, only 10% of our investigations are targeting that sort of level of, or sort of that line of effort. So any additional resources would be helpful. And again, the need for additional criminal analysts to support these investigations, which as I mentioned, are typically long-term investigations and require lots of combing through data. Increasing our international footprint, whether that's getting more special agents down in Mexico and Northern Triangle. One other thing that would be extremely helpful is the stipend, the authority to pay a stipend to some of the other, our international partners, which is, an authority that some of our other federal law enforcement components like DEA have to sort of, encourage or incentivize some of these partnerships with our international partners. So just being able to have the authority to provide a stipend, I think will also sort of enhance our investigative, work abroad, and will help break up or target some of these transnational criminal organizations and break up some of the human trafficking, smuggling, and narcotics trafficking.
We have some of the brightest intel analysts in the world and forensic accountants. I mean, you think, you always follow the money, and we should be able to disrupt these transnational criminal organizations a lot easier than it's taking. But yeah, again, it's about you telling us what resources you need to do your job. I know Dutch Rupsberger mentioned it earlier. You have a very hard and difficult job, and we appreciate what you do. Which kind of leads me to, we know ICE has already sent an overwhelming amount of their resources and personnel to the southern border. How has this affected morale within your agency?
I mean, I think morale is in a pretty good spot. I mean, look, we're recognizing how important the mental health and well-being of our staff is. We're certainly required to send a good number of folks to the southern border, but we are, keeping an eye on folks and trying to make sure that it's as voluntary as possible, so not to impact individuals and their families. So, we have no reason to believe that morale is down, and our workforce is resilient, and they certainly, will step up to the plate and take on the task at hand.
No, that's good to hear. Reviewing your ICE annual report for fiscal year 2021, quick questions. I noticed there's a lot of discussions about seized currency. Real quick, what do you do with that seized currency? Does it go back into your department? Does it go back into U.S. Treasury? And I'd just like to point out also, I mean, we've mentioned almost over 900,000 pounds of hard narcotics that were actually seized at the border. I'm sure y'all have mathematicians. If that's what was seized and only like 20 to 30% of the cargo is actually scanned and detected, what would be your estimate of hard narcotics that actually makes its way into the country that we don't seize, that is destroying communities of color, does not matter, geography or boundaries, that's basically harming all of our communities in America?
So, and I will confirm that this is accurate, but I'm pretty certain that all seizures of funds get sent to the Treasury forfeiture account. And that's whether it's ICE or any other federal agency, whereby these federal agencies can use those funds to sort of, for other investigation or investigative efforts in the future. So I'm pretty certain that's the way that works. And whether we have any stats on exactly how much narcotics is actually slipping through, I don't know that we have a way to actually quantify that. I mean, as you noted, HSI sort of seized over 14,000 pounds of fentanyl in FY21, which is, which is a significant amount of seizures. So, we'll circle back and let you know if there's a way to quantify the sort of what has sort of got away, but I'm not sure that there is offhand.
All right. Thank you, Director. And again, thank you for your hard work and that of your team.
Mr. Eschlard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Acting Director. Secretary Mayorkas previously expressed his commitment to us to review detention facilities across the country. Earlier this year, ICE also announced that it would end the use of an Alabama detention facility that had a profound history of mistreating immigrants in detention. And the chairwoman pointed your attention to the facility in New Mexico as well. Can you provide an update on the status of the review of ICE detention architecture? What's the criteria for the review and termination of contracts, and how many facilities have been reviewed?
Very good question. I mean, I guess we would start with that there's been at least a handful of closures since the new administration took office. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but we did recently close a facility in Alabama, or in the process of getting out of that facility, if I remember correctly, as well as a facility and Florida. The review is ongoing. We continue to assess our detention facilities each and every day. And we will continue to do so. If we become aware of a facility that's not meeting our high standards, then we will take appropriate action to either fix the problem. And if the problem can't be fixed, then we have no issues with discontinuing use of a particular facility. So to answer your question directly, the review is ongoing. It has resulted in the closure of some facilities, but I cannot speak to what's on the horizon.
But can you tell us what that review process looks like? Is it a team that does site visits? Do you look at capacity in addition to the physical infrastructure of the facilities? What are some of the criteria that goes into that?
So it was a team that looked at all the, going back 5 or 7 years, all of the various inspectional reports of the different entities that are responsible for providing oversight at facilities, whether it's OIG, whether it's CRCL, Office of Detention Oversight, Nakamoto. It's a number of folks that issue inspectional reports. So it included a review of the historical and inspectional reports, as well as some visits to certain facilities or data calls to certain facilities to request additional information.
I would encourage, I know some of that process started during, obviously during, COVID and during some surges, but, to the extent, physical site reviews, can be a part of that. I think I would encourage you and the team to think through that. There's some things that a paper review just can't show you clearly. And that's just something that I think, can be added as well. I also wanted to bring your attention to California, obviously, is made some news related to private detention contracts. The state passed a law banning for-profit prisons and detention centers. However, at the time, ICE quickly sped through a contract as well. And so I wanted to ask the status of those contracts with for-profit companies before that law went into effect. Do you anticipate reviewing these types of contracts during that architecture review?
Sure. I mean, no facility is off the table for review. I mean, we've been looking at a few facilities in California, and you're absolutely right. When we were about to be in a situation where we could no longer secure any detention space in California forever, we did sort of go out and enter into some contracts just so that we could have them in our back pocket in the event that we ever need them in the future. But since it's been at least 3 or so years since that law was enacted, and we have not. Maybe it's been one small facility that we activated, but we have not expanded our detention population in California as a result of these contracts to date.
And oftentimes we pay for that capacity, whether we use it or we don't. So I think that would be of importance to this committee as well. Thank you, Acting Director. Appreciate you being here. And thank you, Chairwoman. Yield back.
Microphone.
Okay. I was told that Mr. Rutherford was on his way back, but I don't see him. I don't know if there's any other questions that anyone has. Okay, with that, I will adjourn the hearing. Director Johnson, I want to thank you very much for your time and for your service. And With that, the Subcommittee on Homeland Security stands adjourned.